Hey guys, it's time to Netflix and chill, and today's video, we're not gonna be just going over version 6.1.2, which are the week 3 PTS patch notes for update 27, or rather Stonethorn DLC patch. We're also gonna be going over a very important piece of information that everyone should probably keep an eye on, and that's in regards to the testing on the live servers for open world Cyrodiil PvP. And I'll be going into detail in regards to the what we're doing on our end as class representatives in regards to that, and I'll also be giving my own opinion as to the testing of the changes in regards to hopefully going towards a resolution of the server performance issues we often see in PvP. So firstly, let's go over 6.1.2. I'm pretty much gonna skip over a lot of this, except they did include this, which is pretty appreciated, because not a lot of people check the I believe it's in the Alliance War in PvP sub forum of the main forums. So that it's nice to see that they included the area of effect ability testing in Cyrodiil at the very top of the PTS patch notes, but we're gonna kind of skip over that and get to that later. I'm pretty much gonna skip everything here because I'm not really interested in seeing the dungeon fixes or whatever. Alright, combat and gameplay. So combat and gameplay. Nightblade, Assassination, Executioner, passive. This passive now triggers whenever an enemy dies, or enemies? Okay. Whenever enemies die within 2 seconds of being damaged by you. Well, lots of spelling errors here, okay? Rather than requiring the damage to be an assassination ability. Remove the hidden 1 millisecond cooldown. Fixed an issue where this passive could fail to work with multiple Nightblades. Fixed an issue where this passive was causing unnecessary message spam and ability applications to enemies. That's a bit too much. I mean, this is like, now triggers whenever... Okay, that's a... I don't know, I feel like this is quite a buff, for sure, so even more next patch, Nightblade, especially in PvE as a DPS class, is gonna be definitely more attractive even compared to right now. So that's interesting, pretty interesting buff. So we'll keep an eye on that. Weapon, bow, rapid fire, and toxic barrage. And the fact that you don't even have to use an assassination ability. That's interesting. Rapid fire, toxic barrage morph. Fixed an issue where the damage over time effect from this attack would apply to the target, even if they dodged all instances of damage. That's more for PvP. The poison will now apply on each tick, but with a delay of 1 second to ensure it does not deal damage until they have stopped taking damage from the ability. Fixed an issue where this portion of the ability cannot stack from multiple players. Okay, that's more for PvP. Itemization and item sets. You fixed numerous issues with item sets that required fully charged heavy attacks in order to proc. Tooltips now better clarify if you must complete a heavy attack in order to gain the bonus, or if damage must actually be done. This will also fix issues where some sets were applying their effects to targets that had dodged the heavy attack. Note, Infallible Mage is still currently applying to enemies who dodged the attack, and will be fixed in a future PTS patch note. Deadwater's Guile fixed an issue where it could fail to work in a scenario where I guess there's other people wearing it. Shadow of the Red Mountain increased the damage of this set to 12,840. But they increased the cooldown. Okay, I was like, wait a minute, isn't that like a 3-second cooldown or something? But they increased the cooldown to 8 seconds up from 10. Okay, I was like, what? The set no longer procs on weapon passives as they are considered procs. Okay, fair enough. Dungeon and Arena, Kalurian's Legacy. This set once again requires a critical strike in order to trigger. That's interesting. Okay, I think that's because of Malakath's, since Malakath's Band of Brutality is, does buff proc set damage. So if you can't crit, you can't use Kalurians. And I know it's been brought up as a huge concern by a lot of endgame PvPers on the forums and elsewhere that next patch is gonna be a proc meta. You can just build for high health, 30k, 40k health, and just wear proc sets. And that's pretty much it. In conjunction with the fact that Malakath's Band of Brutality is like buffing proc set damage. Yeah, it was a huge concern. But yeah, obviously we saw that coming, right? And I even made a video on Malakat's Man of Brutality a while ago, and some people were doubtful, but I mean, yeah, there you go, the results. This set no longer excludes non-magical oriented attacks to proc its condition. Interesting. Increase the damage done to 14,200, up from 13,029. Okay. Elemental Succession. Reduce the spell damage granted per element to 492, down from 550. It was like not the greatest set. It was kind of lackluster, and now it's kind of like, okay, no, it's definitely, I mean, a lot of people thought, oh, it's great, or as great as the typical setups on the macro. But it's like, at this point, it's kind of meh. It's kind of whatever. Okay, these changes were included in the first PTS patch, but the patch notes were unintentionally missed. Stormmaster fixed an issue where the set wasn't properly activating off critical strikes. Okay. PvP, Blessing of Potentates. Reduced the damage reduction of Potentates down from 5% to 3%. Okay. You know, a lot of PvPers would recommend me, like, oh, you should wear that. And then a lot of other PvPers would say, oh, that's overrated. So I'm like, okay, well, whatever, I guess. The Trial, Arms of Reliquant and Perfected. Oh boy, here we go. Reduce the maximum stack count of this set to 10. Down from 15, okay. To mirror the changes, sorry. Reduce the cooldown of generating stacks to 500 milliseconds, down from 1 second. Okay. Increase the damage per tick to 300 per stack. Or increase, sorry, I said reduce, I think. No, never mind. Increased it to 300 from 200 per stack to ensure the DPS remains the same. Okay, fair enough. Overall, this will make the set take less time to ramp up and be more viable outside of single target encounters. I mean, you'll still probably just use it for single target encounters, but okay. Vestments of Olariming fixed an issue where the set was granting major courage to allies closest to the epicenter of the ring, rather than who has the shortest duration of the buff. So that's kind of, I think a lot of people were worried about the fact that I now buff 6 people at a time per second, and as to how the buff, how smart the buff was in correctly applying its major courage to people, multiple people standing in it. That's over the amount of 6 people. So that's kind of interesting. But again, I guess they forgot to mention that. Mythic items, Duration Stranglers. Reduce the weapon and spell damage per stack to 17, down from 40. Okay. That kind of just completely obliterated the last week's iteration. This set no longer the PTS iteration. This set no longer causes you to take 1% more damage per stack or decrease your healing taken by 1% per stack. Okay, then what does it do? This set now causes you to lose 120 maximum health for every stack you have. That's a lot of health. The maximum stack count stays at 50? Oh, okay. That's a lot of health. Resulting in the final stats to be 850 weapon and spell damage, minus 6,000 health, and minus 50% shield efficacy. Sorry. Increase the duration of the stacks to 1 hour, up from 10 minutes, to better cement the quasi-permanent permanency. So, it's like, I mean, they pretty much killed it for trials, and I mean, maybe it was like okay for 4-man, or maybe for Maelstrom Arena, but now this is like, it's completely dead. It's literally just, I really do feel sorry for the people who have to like fish for Duration Stranglers, but it's literally dead. It's literally a roleplay item. Like, what? You're gonna sacrifice 6,000 health for 850 weapon and spell damage? You'd have to be literally brain dead to want it. But I mean, yeah, if you want it, go for it, I guess. But I guess on the plus side, you do you don't take more damage or get, you know, healing reduction per stack. But 6,000 health, minus 50%. I don't know, dude. I feel like they just don't know what to do with durations. I feel like the last iteration was fine. I mean, obviously, having it for trial content or trial groups was not healthy. But at this point, they're just literally just burying it in the graveyard. based on much of the feedback we saw from the developer comment in last week's PTS Patch Note, we decided to spend more time looking at the cursed aspect of gameplay the set involved, as well as its maximum power threshold it added. By more aggressively reining in the ceiling the set provides, we can more safely allow these set to exist in content, even when smart players find clever ways to bypass the curse involved. Excuse me. With the loss of max health, rather than increase of damage taken, we can make the curse feel more visceral, as it's something you can see rather than feel after it's too late to react. Additionally, the reduction of max health better balances the set with damage shields, as many of these abilities are capped to your max health. By lowering your max health, their size is also lowered. We're still keeping the penalty to shield strength though, as there are other plenty of methods you can use to help alleviate the penalty, like, I guess, green health food, but don't want you to be able to completely ignore it. Finally, the hour-longer duration helps make this set feel permanent. I mean, they're saying we're hoping to see a much better balance between the DPS gaps we saw expanding Raymore. But this will not affect DPS gaps. I mean, it was already kind of dead. It's in trials. It's kind of beating a dead horse, in my opinion. Monster masks, whatever. Fixed an issue, okay. And I think that's pretty much it. Is that it? Housing, okay. Miscellaneous. Fixed an issue. Yeah, I think that's it. Alright, and this is going to be the post regarding the update on Cyrodiil performance and upcoming AoE tests. Needless to say, this got a lot more attention than the week 3 PTS Patch Notes. It's quite the bombshell to drop on Monday, and I kind of just waited most of the day and hung around just to see a lot of your reactions, opinions, thoughts, and so forth in regards to this post. And suffice to say, I think a lot of the reaction I've seen was expected, anticipated, understandable. So for those of you who haven't caught up on the news yet, Rich Lambert posted this on the forums. As part of our ongoing performance optimizations, we've been spending a lot of time analyzing and addressing problems in Cyrodiil. I'm going to give a summary of what has happened over the years, what we've been doing to alleviate the problems, and our future plans. When talking about ESO server performance, it's important to understand that all abilities in the game, with some exceptions, have a soft limit on the number of times they can be executed. An example of a hard limit on an ability is an ability that can be executed one time every 2 seconds enforced by the server. ESO doesn't have many of those. Instead, we designed the game to have soft limits, which means you can execute as many abilities as you want, as long as you have the resources, stamina, or magic kit to cast them. There is a global cooldown timer on all abilities, which is set to 1000 milliseconds. And, you know, this is the combat system ESO. This is the widely praised combat system ESO. You can ask, you know, I mentioned this on stream the other day, you can ask anyone. PvEer, PvPer, whatever content creator, the combat system is, like, what keeps a lot of people playing ESO, as far as people who are interested in actually doing the combat and not housing or whatever, right? The design goal of soft limits in any game is to allow players to create builds that let them execute abilities more often depending on build choices made, and not to have hard ceilings on damage or healing per second. This gives a lot of control to the player, which makes for a really fun and interesting system, but it can lead to situations where players cast too many abilities too quickly and continuously if strict limits on resources are not enforced. Over the years, player power has grown considerably. With the addition of the champion point system, various armor/weapon sets, and changes to abilities, we have reached a stage where players with the right build can cast near infinite numbers of abilities. If you add in a properly managed group, I think they're referring to like raids, with some focused on damage and some focused on healing and regen boost, you have a perpetually running, never-ending stream of abilities. This is specifically referencing PvP ball groups. 12-man, 24-man, 40-man Zergs. Not Zergs, ball groups, sorry. Meaning that they're much more organized, they're in voice comms. You know, they're they're listening to callouts. You have dedicated purge bots. You have dedicated synergy bombers with harmony. You have people with negates. You have people with standards. Everyone coordinating everything. And I'm gonna make a PvP raid composition video. I was planning to, at least, and what I plan to talk about was a lot of responsibilities and jobs of the people in PvP raids. And it will surprise you, for those of you who've never really experienced, PvP ball groups. You just kind of looked at them, right? It will surprise you as to how much shit they're pushing out literally every second, right? I think I, streamed a MagDK Harmony Bomber / support build in that 8-man PvP raid this past weekend with Toxic and Andy and the boys. And you would see on my bars with the rest of the staff, by the way, like, you would see Illustrious Healing, you'd see like Radiating Regen. Times that by 12, times that by 24, times that by 30, 40, however many people you want to run. And yeah, you're going to have a lot of performances. You're going to see a lot of lag. You're going to see frame rates drop. And I'm sure those of you who participated in this past Mid-Year Mayhem, even if you don't go into Cyrodiil, have seen these groups. Not to say, they're evil people for playing the game the way they want, but they certainly, the actions, like the constant actions, is definitely exacerbative, right? So that's what they're referencing here. Those organized PvP ball groups moving around the map, and so forth. And I'm sure a lot of you have stories in regards to your experiences when you go near those groups, or when multiple groups of a huge size, or even a decently like 12-man, 15-man size, are rolling around in various locations in the map, or in the same spot on the map, and that can lag out other people on the other side of the map. But anyway, with that in mind, consider how AoE abilities work. When cast, they look at a specific target area, almost always the area directly around the caster. Find targets and perform the ability. Each of those steps requires server calculations. Right. At launch, Cyrodiil's processes were able to keep up with the number of AoEs cast, because most players couldn't cast that many of them. They ran out of magicka or stamina, so they had to use AoEs judiciously. Over time, as player knowledge grew and regen builds grew in power, more players could cast more and more AoEs before running out of resources. I'm kind of curious as to which specific patch or year or update that they're referring to here, because I think even in 2015, we had a lot of people spamming a lot of AoEs, but whatever. During these years, we found and fixed many performance issues in Cyrodiil, and we continue to do so. We fixed significant issues, uncovered more, and continue to find and fix with every update. However, one foundational issue remains. At some point, we crossed a threshold where most players in PvP were able to cast endless AoE abilities without ever running out of resources. This is done through player knowledge, builds, and group mechanics, resulting in a constant stream of AoEs, with many players never using any other type of ability. This is not what we intended. But that's a consequence of the system, right? That's a consequence of this fun, very engaging combat play. So it's like, maybe they didn't intend for the performance issues, but that is certainly going to be a consequence. But part of the fun of Elder Scrolls games is designing a build that has unexpected and powerful results, and we allowed it. However, as this behavior grew more prevalent, we reached the point where casting so many continuous AoE abilities in such a small area started to overwhelm the server process for that area, leading to situations where the lag meter spikes and the server becomes unresponsive for a period of time. Our initial response to this problem, starting with Update 22, was to find and fix more than a few problems with AoE ability calculations and make them more performant, and we stayed mostly ahead of the problem. But as more players reached maximum CP level and more players started utilizing this particular method of AoE spamming, we have reached a point where we cannot fix this issue around the edges. We need to address the core problem, which will be starting with Update 27. To do this, we'll need to first do some analysis, and we can only do this on the live servers. That's true. Every time they ask, it's not even just PvPers. Every time they ask PvPers or PvEers or in a very prominent case, by the way, for Scalebreaker, the multi-bidding feature, they asked, trading guilds or, guild masters or officers to come on the PTS and test out this multi-bidding feature. To stress test it. I was like, how are they going to test it? You're going to ask everybody at, prime time bid, and, also when it's time to bid for traders and stand by on empty traders, you're going to ask people who handle that shit and has a responsibility of, caring for 500 people, 500 person guilds, 1,000 person communities to test it. And that's like really unrealistic. I've always had a problem with this idea of the PTS being some sort of playground for stress testing, because it doesn't make sense. You can't do it. You cannot ever replicate whatever live is onto PTS, whether it's guild traders, and that's part of the reason why, no shocker, that there's been so many issues with guild trader flips and the guild bank balances being filled up with random amounts of gold on EU and PCU. You know what I mean? And this doesn't go just for traders, it goes for PvP. It also goes for PvE, particularly trials. So it's like, we can't really stress test on PTS. And I agree, they need to do this on the live servers. They need to, I think testing on the live servers is fine. A lot of people have already said, this is bullshit. They shouldn't test on the live servers. They should test on the PTS. Well, really? Probably not. That's probably not the right answer. But I'm glad they're doing testing on the live servers at last. As much as we try to avoid running tests on live servers, yeah, they're the only place where the combination of player behavior, specific builds, and mass battles happen. So starting the week of August 24, right, that's like almost a month from now, we'll be running a series of tests on the live PC servers, both NA and U, only in Cyrodiil. So this means this testing that I'm going to be going over here is not going to be present in Battlegrounds or Imperial City, is what I'm assuming. Please note that we'll not be running these tests on any console servers. Each test should take about a week, but if needed, we'll extend the testing time. So assuming there's 4 tests, that's 4 weeks. They could be extended, could be at least a month, could be a month and a half, we don't know. The first round of tests we are planning will focus on AoE abilities in Cyrodiil and make it more difficult for AoE abilities to be the only abilities used, adjusting cooldown, cost, and regen value of all AoEs, damage, and healing. So they said the first round. So these 4 tests is just the first round. So we might see more testing in the future. And yeah, so let's go over the tests. Test number 1, shared global AoE cooldown. 3-second timer. This test adds a global 3-second shared cooldown to any AoE ability. This means that when you cast an AoE, you'll not be able to cast another for 3 seconds. For example, as a Templar, or Dragon Knight, or probably almost any other class, if I cast Ritual Retribution, or Skill X, I wouldn't be able to cast Puncturing Sweep for 3 seconds, or Skill Y for 3 seconds. So that's going to be the first test. Test 2, individual AoE cooldown, 3-second timer. This test adds an individual AoE cooldown to each AoE ability. This means that when you cast an AoE, you will not be able to cast that same AoE ability for 3 seconds. For example, as a Templar, if I cast Puncturing Sweep, I won't be able to cast Puncturing Sweep again for 3 seconds. So instead of X and Y, it's X and X. Test 3, no cooldown, global ramping AoE cost. This test adds a global ramping AoE cost for each AoE cast. Similar to how Streak or Roll Dodge Fatigue works, where you cast in the AoE, you receive a debuff for 5 seconds. Each stack of the debuff increases the cost of any AoE cast. Test 4, individual AoE cooldown, 3-second timer, global ramping AoE cost. This test adds an individual AoE cooldown, but also combines that with test number 3 with the global ramping cost increase. During the times that any of these tests are active, we'll be awarding double alliance points for anyone active in Cyrodiil. After we complete the above tests, we may try other combinations of cooldown, cost, and regen values on AoE abilities. However, we need to run these tests first and then assess the data. We'll then let everyone know what we found and how we'll move forward. We'll be very upfront about it, but please be aware that if these tests confirm my hypothesis, then chain casting AoE abilities will no longer form the core of the ESO PvP experience in the way it has for the last few years. We will then go through each class, ensure that there are viable builds for each, and make adjustments as necessary. And they basically put the coding for this testing into today's PTS update. And then once they launch Update 27, the Stonethorn DLC on August 24th, they'll announce when one of the tests are beginning through an in-game announcement, and also have a detailed forum thread if you guys want, check the progress on that. Remember, these tests will be limited to Cyrodiil, so AoE abilities and other PvP spaces. Okay, so Imperial City and backgrounds, they mentioned it, and will remain unchanged for now. We'll evaluate how these tests go and let everyone know the next steps. They are extremely important for the team and will help us work towards improving Cyrodiil performance. Okay, so before I give you guys my opinion, my personal opinion as a player, as an ESO player, I want to let you guys know what's going on our end as ESO class/combat representatives. The class reps did have a meeting last week in regards to this, and I see a lot of obvious, understandably, anger, frustration, and a lot of blaming, a lot of some of it's kind of unnecessary. The devs know, they understand the backlash was anticipated, and I don't think this was a light decision on part of the people who work on this game to take the testing to live servers and basically do this. It's obviously going to be incredibly unpopular, and this is probably gonna be the largest, or if not one of the largest, hurdles for ESO as a community. Understandably, I've already seen a lot of people say they're not going to help test. They're going to go play other MMOs or games. And, a lot of people are losing the little hope or trust they have in ZeniMax Online Studios. And again, this is all understandable. But that's what I can let you guys know on the devs know, they understand. And again, these are tests. So a lot of people have already pointed to these tests as, okay, this is what they're gonna do, or test number 3 is what they're gonna do as a solution. That's not necessarily true. So that's another thing I can tell you as a class rep. Also, these tests aren't obviously the only thing that will be part of planned performance fixes or improvements to the game, like the item set changes in Update 27. Obviously, that was like the whole bulk of the PTS Patch Notes, and a lot of people have been pinging, direct messaging me and the other class reps, and I can tell you guys without breaking the NDA that the other class reps and I are we're still forwarding your concerns that we've obviously had as well. We're still and going to be in discussions with the devs, and hopefully after, this is going to be a difficult time. After this difficult time, hopefully, ESO will come out stronger. Now I'm going to give my personal opinion on these tests. And, test number 1, the shared global AoE cooldown, adds a global 3-second shared cooldown to any AoE ability. This test and this test number 1 and 2, shared AoE cooldown and individual AoE cooldown, are probably going to yield the best results, because there's a few factors. The first factor is, again, like I mentioned, a lot of people just simply will not play, which is unfortunate. And I feel like the people who are in these bigger ball groups should play and test and help test, right? Not saying that the blame lies with them, but if you really are serious about helping out, the server performance improvements, more data is needed. The second factor is, it's like, of course, it's like less casting, less calculations, less stress on the servers. Any blind person, alright, can I guess they can't read, but they can listen to these patch notes and tell me, or tell you, these 2 tests are probably going to yield the best results. Some people are saying these are going to be false positive results. But regardless, I think they'll probably yield the best results. Because 1, not a lot of people are playing. 2, you're casting less. I mean, that's a really obvious kind of... I don't think you really need a science degree to kind of know if these 2 tests are going to yield the best results. Test number 3, global ramping AoE cost. This is basically cooldowns anyway, because like at a certain point you can't cast any more than that. Again, these are tests, not solutions, and we'll get to that later. But I mean, this is probably going to be the out of all these tests, probably the least intrusive testing done on Cyrodiil. Test number 4, individual AoE cooldown with global ramping cost. That is arguably as bad in terms of gameplay, or even worse potentially, than test 1 or 2, or at least test 2. So, and also like, again, it's just gonna probably yield about the same results as test 1 and 2. And one thing that's worrying a lot of you, and also worries me, is this statement, right? We'll be very upfront, but please be aware that if these tests confirm our hypothesis, and the hypothesis is being, too many AoE spamming going on, is too much stress on the servers, then chain casting AoE abilities will no longer form the core of the ESL PvP experience in the way it has for the last few years. This is the part where I think a lot of us are concerned about, right? And then here, a lot of people who are PvEers are like, I don't give a fuck. It's just PvPers. It's just PvP. I don't know where you guys have been for the past few years, but whatever happens in PvP may, or 99% of the scenarios will affect PvE. So I think this should be of some concern to PvEers as well. I just don't understand all this blame game going on the forums or whatever, but it doesn't make sense to me, but okay. We would then go through each class and ensure that there are viable builds for each and make adjustments as necessary. I want to talk about my best case, worst case scenarios. Alright. The worst case scenarios, probably one of them will at the very least include some of the stuff we see in the testing phases, right? Let's say all the testing's done, things go back to normal, everything's kind of being laid out by the devs, and then they're deciding on what solutions or whatever to go with. And at this point, we kind of already know what the problem is, a lot, right? It just manifests in the form of bot groups. So these are my worst case, best case scenarios to me as a player. What could happen, not necessarily during the testing, but way after the testing, alright, in terms of solutions. The worst case scenario, probably cooldowns. I mean, I don't think a lot of us really like the combat system in certain other MMOs like World of Warcraft, where there are cooldowns. And again, the cooldowns will most likely introduce the best amount of performance gain. So the absolute worst case scenario is cooldowns. Cyrodiil PvP will have cooldowns. And then what happens if you have skills that are on cooldowns? And you gotta realize AoE skills, I don't think some of the people that's been talking about this in a lot of discords or on the forums can't really grasp what is considered AoE in this game. Alright, they mentioned jabs. You think Templars are the only ones that's gonna get, affected, or even like certain specs for Templars? Well, Breath of Life is AoE based. 28 meter range. DKs. Well, I mean, wardens even have a like. I don't know. It's gonna affect a fair amount of classes, a large amount of builds and specs. AOE, global cooldowns on AOEs. So that's the absolute worst case scenario. Cyrodiil PvP pretty much dies. Then, in turn, because you have to compensate for the fact that each skill will have a cooldown, how are you going to adjust that for PvP, but not have it affect PvE? Because whenever they change a skill in terms of the tooltip damage or how the passive works, it's usually almost always, in mind for PvP gameplay balance, not PvE gameplay balance. Nobody in PvE asks, oh, nerf the damage or whatever, or nerf the healing. No one in PvE asks that. But we still feel the repercussions or the consequences of PvP changes. So imagine that. Imagine that. Alright? That's the worst case scenario. Cyrodiil PvP dies. Cooldowns occur. PvE gets affected very negatively, most likely, or unhealthily. Best case scenario for that one. And probably endgame dies. Because it's like, if you're gonna change the combat system, at this point in this game's life, you're just kind of killing off a lot of the interest. You're killing off, the trust. You're killing off what little motivation a lot of endgame PvPers have, and then in turn, the changes that could negatively affect PvE will kind of... I mean, endgame populations aren't that big. This might be worse than... I mean, the absolute worst case scenarios will probably be worse than Morrowind, in my opinion. But what's the next least, or the lesser worst case scenario? Worst case scenario number 2. So it's going to get progressively better from this spectrum. Cooldowns. And maybe, okay, this is the number 2 worst case scenario. That's a little, little less than the absolute worst case scenario, because this is a spectrum. So this is the worst to best, from top to bottom. Alright, it's cooldowns. Cooldowns are still there. And PvE gets slightly affected. Maybe. I mean, that's like, okay, maybe they won't get affected at all. Or maybe they'll, do something with Battle Spirit or something for a lot of these, because who knows? I don't know. Worst case scenario number 3, ramping cost increases. And that's just for Cyrodiil PvP. It's like, it's not, none of these scenarios are really great. Assuming that the tests are going to be used as a basis for solutions, right? And obviously these are still tests, not solutions. Alright, and right now we're here. We're at the status quo. We're at this point where it almost feels like they're pretty much saying, okay guys, we got a great combat system, but performance is shit. And in order to improve performance, we might have to change some of the fundamentals of our combat system, which may make the combat system not that great. So there's this extreme dichotomy going on. Would you rather have option A, or would you rather have option B? There's like no middle ground. Right now we're kind of here. We're deciding. Status quo. The best case scenario, the absolute best case scenario in my opinion, is during this, testing, and they're going through the data, they're sifting through the data, they'll find maybe an entirely different problem. Maybe it has nothing to do with ball groups. Maybe it has nothing to do with AoE spamming. Maybe it has nothing to do with whatever you can list. Maybe it's like an entirely different problem or something. And then they fix it. And nothing has to change. That's probably like 99.9% unrealistic. That's like very utopian. That's like the absolute best case scenario I can like imagine happening. Okay, so what's like the next, a bit more realistic best case scenario? Alright, here it is. Probably creative solutions. And what I mean by this is like, instead of going with cooldowns or whatever wonky idea that may negatively affect the longevity of the game, or kill interest in the game, or change the fundamentals of the combat system in PvP, which can adversely affect PvE, maybe there are better solutions somewhere in the middle. Maybe we should avoid this extreme dichotomy of bad performance with good gameplay versus bad gameplay with good performance. Maybe we shouldn't think of this as such an extreme. Maybe there's better ways. Who knows? Let's keep testing. You know, why don't we try discouraging ball groups? Less AP gain. Maybe they do less healing. There's no cross healing between different groups. So even if you cap the group at maybe like, you know, instead of 24-man groups, maybe they cap it at 12-man groups or 8 or 12-man groups or something like that. But, you know, you'll be like, okay, what if, you know, these 12-man groups decide to run together as 24-man groups? There's two reasons why this could potentially not work. If they decide that, okay, Group A of 12 people cannot affect Group B with healing, if they're on the same alliance, that's going to discourage ball groups. And also discourage the kind of activity that we're seeing, this intense activity. Second, when you separate groups like that, I'm going to tell you guys something. I have never imagined, you know, trying to run with, in the PvP raid, right? I've never imagined that so many people would have such a hard time following Crown. You would think you would think it's dumb, right? Like, why can't people follow Crown? But it takes a lot of practice to coordinate and move together following one person. So when you cap a group to 12 people, and then you try to run in coordination with a different group in the same voice comms, but you don't see the Crown or whatever, that can be incredibly detrimental, and it can hamper group movements. So that'll discourage ball groups, right? And then what if we had solutions where, like, the more people you have in your group, maybe cooldowns start applying. You know what I mean? Or just the cooldown penalties increase in significance. I don't know, anything. Anything that takes us away from this extreme dichotomy of bad performance with good gameplay, or bad gameplay with good performance, is fine by me. Anything. You know, maybe you guys have your own ideas, and you can let me know down in the comments below anything that you might think would discourage ball groups or help solve performance. But when I look at this, right, I just don't feel it, dude. I just don't feel it. You know what I mean? I just can't imagine, you know, like, I played this game for like 5-6 years, and I initially, me and so many other people came over to ESO because of the PvP that was advertised, and also the combat system. You know, I had to stick around through the good times, through the bad times, and I just can't imagine cooldowns in this game. And if cooldowns are part of, you know, future solutions, you can bet probably a lot of people are going to leave the game, and it's probably not going to be great for the game. I just can't imagine it. So, I don't know. What do you guys think about the testing so far? Or rather, the testing on paper so far? What do you guys think they could try in, you know, giving potential or trying out potential solutions? And again, I want to emphasize, these are tests. Now, there are some people saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have global cooldowns in this game for PvP, and that will discourage groups from running together. And I'm just like mind blown. Like, where do these people come from? And do they even think about what they type or say? Like, global cooldowns ultimately not only will kill small scale PvP or whatever, or, you know, just enjoyment of the combat system, but let's say the ball groups stick around or whatever, right? The global cooldowns will not deter groups. The more people you have, the better you are at bypassing a lot of issues that face smaller groups. Healing, sustain, damage, and guess what? Frequency. When you're thinking about yourself as a solo player, whatever, in Cyrodiil, with a, I don't know, 3-second cooldown per AoE ability or whatever. And then you're comparing that to a 24-man group. They are, just because they have more people, they are using their abilities at a higher rate. How does that deter ball groups? How does this deter large groups? Because think about it, in a larger group, you don't see a lot of penalties. I don't know why so many people think every time certain changes come out for PvP, they're like, oh yeah, that's gonna discourage zerging or ball groups. Literally, never. Not even when Proxy Death was buffed, or not even when Vicious Death was introduced to the game, did that discourage zerging. So I don't know why people think global cooldowns will discourage zerging. It's gonna encourage it. So, I don't know. But, yeah, I guess let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts are in regards to everything here. Personally, I'm hopeful that we could potentially find, you know, again, there's going to be data they're going to probably comb through after all this testing. And maybe, again, going back to my scenarios, I think maybe potentially we could find solutions that don't have to go to cooldowns. That don't have to, essentially, what is a cooldown? A global ramping AoE cost? That's essentially a cooldown. Because you're going to have to stop at a certain point anyway. But yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, stay safe and have fun.